benchmark with you. Just talking to Joe about this earlier. Without you, the small businesses, Coeur d'Alene does not exist. Think about that. People need to thank a locally owned business because without them, we don't exist. People just don't set up tents in the forest and exist there. Communities don't exist without small businesses. It's a fact. And the large chain stores don't come in until the businesses take all the risk and establish the community. Isn't that amazing? So we thank you for being what you are. We're here to support you for that. Today, for those of you who have never met Joe Hamilton, you're not the only one. I was thrilled to meet with Joe. He gave me an hour. I think we took an hour and 15 minutes. And even after he researched me and what we do, he still took 20 minutes of my time grilling me to make sure, because that's a passion of his. Choose Local is a passion of his. It's nice to have men like that that are visionaries, that understand what it can do for our communities. Now, he shared with me something that I thought was pure brilliance. Now, he'll admit he didn't think this up, but he was smart enough to learn about it and apply it. Too many of us hear a good concept, go, that's good, and it's the last thought we have. He's actually applied it. How many people have been to Pilgrim?
Oh my gosh, I live next door.
Yeah? Yeah.
I jog right there.
Yeah.
Is it not a warm and inviting environment? When you go in, aren't the staff friendly and knowledgeable? They're taking ownership in Joe's business because he allows them to. Wouldn't you want, if you have employees, wouldn't you want that for yourself? I mean, too often we see employees as just numbers. They can be replaced. With what Joe and his staff do, it changes all the dynamics. So today, let's give a big hand for the genius behind that marketing system. He loves what I do. He told me I lay it on kind of heavy.
Yeah.
But we love them. I mean, everybody loves. I have people that come from out of state to visit, and they want to meet at Pilgrim so they can stock up. They're going back to Montana, Washington, and other places. That really says a lot for an organization. So, Joe, we'll get you up here.
Okay.
And what I need to do is this.
No more genius talk. That makes me a little uncomfortable.
He deserves it.
No. Yeah. Okay. Well, hi. Thanks. Well, thanks everyone. I have to start off. I'm a little out of my element. I'm definitely not a public speaker. I mean, I speak to staff, but this is it's a little out of my element. I'm going to do my best. I do want to say right off the bat that I welcome a conversational format. So if any of you have any questions or any thoughts as I go, it'll actually help me, and it may wind up helping you guys too. Because I think when we engage, listening to one person for an hour straight gets a little mundane after a while. I get bored listening to myself for that long. But anyway, first of all, I want to thank all of you that are a part of this part of the community. And Nels, I think you guys are doing great stuff. I am a member of an association of independent natural food stores. And I have come to value that really greatly. I think having associations, sharing best practices with each other, encouraging one another is absolutely wonderful. And I have never really done that in Coeur d'Alene. I know the Chamber does a lot of great things, but I don't know. I don't really have a reason that I haven't been involved. I just haven't. I imagine that they do a lot of great things, but for whatever reason, I did take a meeting with Nels, and it sounds like this is the beginning of a really great association that I think all of us local folks can benefit from. Real quickly, before I get started, I just want to have a sense of who we have here. I have never been to a meeting, so by a show of hands, is anyone retired in here? We got one retiree. All right, congratulations. How many of you are in executive or management level in your business? Okay, yeah, a really good portion. How many of you work in a company that's less than 5 employees? Yeah, okay. How many more than 15 employees? Yeah, all right. Well, cool. Well, thanks. It's kind of nice to know who the audience is, I guess. I'm in a business with a lot of employees, and grocery is not generally executive level sort of career. I mean, grocery businesses have a lot of what I would say entry level and very mid-level, I suppose, people. I mean, we're not doctors and attorneys and don't have occupational degrees, and so I think that when you're in a business like mine, I think how you deal with your people and create an environment where they want to succeed and you're all in it together really makes a big difference. Whereas maybe some careers, it's a little more self-evident. But at any rate, so I agreed to talk about creating a culture of ownership. And that's a saying really that I've kind of grabbed from a book that I read. Well, I guess I read it and I was exposed to the concept 3 or 4 years ago. The book was called The Great Game of Business, but written by someone named Jack Stack. And I'm going to actually talk about that towards the end. The Great Game of Business also goes by another name, Open Book Management. And basically, that is what I will say now, sort of maybe the culminating sort of system that we've put in place at Pilgrims in my effort to create a culture of ownership among all the staff. So, but what I thought I would do is I thought I would kind of, I don't know, I was thinking about this and I realized that the great game of business is not the whole picture for me. And so I thought back at different things that I think are key to the way I approach managing team members. And I've kind of wound up coming up with this sort of chronology of lessons I learned over my life and that I think that all come together to make the great game of business work and to make this creating culture of ownership work. Okay, so I've got about 4 or 5 life experiences, and I'm going to try to go through quickly, and then sort of a guiding principle that I took away from it, and then I'm going to give a business application the way I feel like the lesson I learned there fits into the approach the way I run Pilgrims. So anyway, the first one is kind of funny. It's actually an experience of rejection. And it's not from a sweetheart, like most of us maybe felt rejection at one point. I'm still married to my high school sweetheart, so I'm thankful for that, actually. Yeah. But anyway, when I was in college, I had 2 experiences that really left a lasting impression on me. And what happened is, the first one, it was a calculus class, right? I had taken calculus in high school. They made me do it in college and made me take a class all over again. I knew how to do the work, and I would do the work and get the correct answer, but I wouldn't show my work in the way that the professor wanted, and so I got bad grades. Now, with the maturity that I have now, I can see why you would want to train someone to do it in that manner. But at the time, I was young and rebellious and was like, I got it right, phooey with you. And anyway, it bothered me, because I felt like I had something to offer. I felt a little bit of disrespect, really. I'm like, you're not respecting me. I got the right answer, and you're not going to give me a good grade here. And I felt that was, on some level, some sort of a injustice. And then there was another one the same year. It was my first semester in college, and I had to write a paper for some class. And this was 1989, and this is before Microsoft Word. This is when Apple had had begun their, I kind of call it militant, you'll see why in a moment, but their militant campaign of really, becoming heavily invested in academia. So I don't know if you guys remember this, but Apple computers were in every college then, and they made like drones of all the professors. And anyway, I still don't like Apple because of this experience. But basically, I wrote my paper on, we didn't even have Word then. Maybe some of you remember a software called WordPerfect. I think it ran on DOS. Yeah, right. So I mean, I can't tell this story with my staff. Everyone's so young, they have no idea. Among other stories, they don't have any idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, so I turned this paper in, and I wrote it on WordPerfect, and the professor refused to read it. Or, well, read it, I mean, maybe he did never read it, actually. But he refused at least to grade it. And because I hadn't written it on an Apple, using the one in their little library and printing it with their serif font, whatever, right? And okay, injustice number 2, and it just really irritated me. Again, I'm like, you guys aren't really, I'm paying you to educate me. You should be looking into the person that I am and the quality of what I'm giving you, and instead you're getting hung up on these little technicalities, and it really irritated me, so I dropped out of college. So basically, my guiding principle there is that I think that it's left a lasting impression on me, and I try to prevent rules from getting in the way of true capabilities, okay? Yeah, and so business application, I put, be very careful. I am very careful setting rules at Pilgrims, and I also am selectively break them all the time, because I think everyone is different, and one rule may be good for one person and not good for the next. So anyway, okay, life experience number 2. So after I dropped out of college, I moved to Hawaii with my wife, girlfriend at the time, and we worked on some boats over there, snorkel boats, fishing boats, that sort of thing. And anyway, I had another bad experience where I worked for this captain and co-captain or whatever, first mate, I think you call it. And they were just like a bunch of snots, I mean, they basically abused their power, I mean, they I don't know, in a variety of ways. Let's just say they didn't really respect the folks working around them. You've all probably seen people that have abused their power, and you know how they do it. There's just small little things that they do. It's kind of like, you're going to do this, and even when they probably should be doing it or taking responsibility for something, At any rate, I witnessed firsthand another abuse of power, and kind of at college, it was hung up on these details. And this other one on the boat really wasn't details as much as just power tripping. I mean, I think we all know what that is. So anyway, the sort of guiding principle that I took away from that was leaders need to lead by example and earn respect from the people that are reporting to them, and not not abuse power. And then I put business application. I put, well, you hear this one, you do see this one. Every leader needs to make sure they never say things like, "That's not my job." You got to treat everyone fairly. It's lasting impression with me is to make sure to treat everyone fairly. And I have to say this, after that job. Literally, at the age of 19, I told myself, at least I had the consciousness, self-awareness, and I said, you know what, I'm never going to work for someone like this again, and I'm never going to be a part of a business where, if I'm in a position of authority at least, where the people that report to me feel like that. And so literally, at age 19, I was like, that is just not cool. And I think, maybe some of it is I went to I don't know, and maybe my dad's here, maybe I credit my dad. I think growing up, I felt that I could do things and was recognized and respected. And I went to a high school where I felt like teachers really respected the students. My high school is St. George's in Spokane, give them a little plug here. But as a student there, they never got hung up on rules. I mean, it was all about you. And I remember, and it's crazy when I tell other people this, but I could walk in, I could interrupt a class. Anyone could interrupt a class, like with this one math teacher. And he would, and it really wasn't a disservice for the others, but he would come over and spend like a minute with you if needed to help you through a project. You could walk into the faculty room, which most schools, that's going to be way off limits. But anyway, I think I just kind of had this, I don't know, I always think I was very fortunate, I suppose, to be treated with respect and people that genuinely cared. And so both of those incidents that I just explained, I didn't feel that these people really cared, and I didn't feel respected. And so that's a lasting impression, and I try to make all the decisions at Pilgrims remembering those things, and along with these others that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so then I came back to college, and there's a couple other principles that stuck with me. I decided to get a degree in outdoor recreation because that's what I like to do, and that was my passion. And I felt it was really important for people to, have a good time, to blow off the steam. But I also realized that there were really valuable life lessons for yourself individually, as well as for, like in group dynamics. Believe it or not, outdoor recreation isn't all outdoor recreation. I mean, we studied group dynamics and we studied leadership and things like that. So trust falls and all that. But anyway, let's see. So the first one there is rock climbing. I got really into rock climbing. And an interesting thing about rock climbing is if you're climbing on a wall that's vertical or less than vertical, okay, the worst thing you can do is to get closer to the wall, okay? So, if gravity is moving straight down and your wall is less than vertical, you should be vertical here so that all of the force of gravity, so that you're not deflecting any of your force. If you lean closer to the wall, which you feel is a point of safety, I'm holding on to this thing, right? What happens is that you actually deflect some of your weight out of gravity. So you actually are in a more dangerous, precarious position. You're more likely to fall. And so the moral of the story here, it's a little bit visual, is that in rock climbing, if you push yourself away from what you think is safety, right? You push yourself into your fear, you're actually in a safer position gravity-wise. You're also in a position now where you can see your feet, like where are you going to go next, right? If you're hanging on the wall like this, you can't really see anything. You're just holding on to that thing. So anyway, that was a takeaway for me that I really felt has value elsewhere in life. And I think the takeaway was what was mine? Let's see. Fear impedes good thinking and success, okay? So when we grasp too tightly for fear, we can't really see things, okay? Business application, I think that most people really hide their true feelings and their desires and their passions often. And so in business, I try very hard to make people feel safe, right? And feel comfortable, because I know that people are going to hide their true feelings in a lot of situations. And if you, and you know what, you got to go out of your way as a leader to make them feel safe. And in fact, I think, strong sailors aren't made in calm seas. I think that if we allow people, I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. Okay, next one is still in the college years. Oh, okay. So rafting, this was interesting thing too that stuck with me, and it informs a lot of decisions I make in business. And a professor explained a phenomenon called the risk shift phenomenon. Okay, and in a high risk setting, which generally is more perceived risk than real risk, and you get a lot of that. We take someone, rock climbing or whitewater rafting or jumping out of an airplane. I mean, statistically, it's actually really safe, but there's a really high level of perceived risk, right? So there's a lot of fear. Anyway, this whole risk shift phenomenon is that a lot of people in a situation like that, so take river rafting, they shift. I don't know. Let's see. They shift their safety, if you will, onto the guide. Right? So the guy who's in charge of the boat like that, well, if you guys have been river rafting, usually there's a guide in the back steering and stuff, but they're pretty helpless without everyone else because everyone's got to do their job. Left forward, right back, all forward, whatever, if you've done that. And so anyway, so the risk shift phenomenon when in a fearful situation can literally sink your ship. Sink your raft, okay. But anyway, it's something that, what's happening is that a person isn't taking accountability. They're not taking that personal responsibility, okay? And so that was another thing that just kind of stuck with me, that when you're in, and it's life and death in a raft, and you're in there with a group of people, if everyone in that raft isn't doing their job, they got to know their job, they got to do their job, and if they're not, then you're all at risk. And I think obviously the business application there is that you've got to, I've always felt that I've got to find ways and systems that kind of make people aware of their responsibility and hold them accountable. No great miracle there, but it is something that I think is really important. And it plays into the great game of business that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. Okay, and I did mention here that in terms of holding people accountable, there's a lot of ways to do that. You can hold people accountable with threats, with fear, but I do want to mention that I think, finding systems that make people aware of their responsibility and hold them accountable in a manner that really makes them want to accept that responsibility. And you do that through reward and recognition and so forth. So, okay, so then next life experience that I think has contributed to this approach that I take at Pilgrims came in my parenting stage of life. And anyway, most of you, how many of you have kids? How many of you have become the person you are today because of those kids somehow, right? Having kids is massive, and you have to ask yourself a lot of questions. You have to reflect. You wind up, because they'll ask you, why is that, Dad? Oh, I got to have answers. Okay. So anyway, how many of you have heard of Love and Logic? It's a parenting system, if you will, a course that you can take, and my wife and I took it, and basically, the Love and Logic. It's a couple psychiatrists sort of designed this and wrote the book, and one of them's even from Sandpoint. But basically, the concept is that your role as a parent is to develop your children. Is maybe not to create robots and automatons, and not to get them just to follow rules and do as you say, even though that's helpful sometimes. But that you're to develop them and let them, sort of discover. How to be successful on their own, and so anyway, the concept, this whole Love and Logic, is that you don't over-parent your kids. You let them fail. So a kid goes to school, forgets their lunch. You don't run it to them. A kid doesn't prepare for their homework. Homework. You don't do their homework for them. You're not, they didn't write their paper properly. You run in there and you're helping them write the paper or writing the paper. And these things do happen. But anyway, the idea is that kids learn if we allow them to fail and hold them to consequences when they're young. They'll learn how to handle stressful situations. They'll learn how to handle and prevent failure on their own when they're young, as opposed to when they're older. Because ultimately, our kids we're not going to be able to parent our kids forever, right? And so we're not going to be able to save them and run them their lunch. And it's best to let them learn those hard mistakes when they're young. And so anyway, that left a lasting impression with me too, which was to allow failure. My guiding principle is to allow failure for future success and let passion blossom. That's another thing that is just as applicable in my opinion, in parenting as it is in business. I mean, it's really easy for us to have our own idea of what we want that kid to be like or what we want that employee to do. But at the end of the day, we don't ourselves perform well when someone else is telling us who to be and how to be, with certain limits, you know. And I think that our employees are the same way. Yeah.
Do you mind repeating that last?
My guiding principle?
Yes, please.
Allow failure for future success and let passion blossom. So the idea is that if we allow failure, and I think in the business setting, you know, I mean, I let, you know, people fail all the time, and I come alongside them and say, hey, this is okay. I expect this. This is new to you or whatever. I mean, obviously, I let someone fail at something forever, but I really go out of my way to let people know that, thank you. Let people know that it's okay to fail, because if you're not trying, you're not going to fail. I mean, we've all heard the Edison, and I found a million ways to fail at a light bulb, and Michael Jordan was the same thing. You know, he's like, everyone talks about all the baskets I made, but they forget the stat of, you know, the tens of thousands that I missed. So anyway, that's something that's always stuck with me. And I think that if a person feels safe and they really recognize that they're being respected and that they're in a safe place, that most people, given that environment, will learn and will appreciate that, and then will, in future endeavors at work, you know, do better. Anyway, okay, so yeah, I pretty much explained the application. So the next one is, heart of a servant. Well, this is another one. At the same time, like I said, you know, your kids start asking you why, and and you've got to have answers. Well, it was when I was a parent that I you know, sort of revisited the religious things of my youth, and I became involved in church again, started reading the Bible and all that, and in relation to business application, the book of Mark tells us that Jesus, the creator of the entire universe, came on the earth, first time anyway, to serve and not to be served. And I think that having a heart of a servant, I mean, look, if God Almighty did that, I think maybe I should follow suit. And I think that that has real value in work and in the workplace. Because at the end of the day, if I'm in a position of supervision, I just don't see any way that I can be successful if I don't help the people working for me, with me, help them be successful. I don't know how you can do it. I mean, anyway. So, okay, so that ends like my parenting sort of chapter. And now getting into business chapter, I read a lot of books, and a lot of books have had a lot of impact on me. I'm just going to talk about a couple. The first one is really when I first started working for my dad. He had 5 vitamin stores at the time in like 1994. And anyway, I started reading this book called In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters. Any of you ever? Yeah, a great book back in the 80s. And so anyway, there were 2 stories in that book that really stuck with me and, you know, kind of made a lasting impression. And one of them was a story of this exercise, research, I guess you could call it, that IBM was doing. And IBM basically was setting out to figure out, you know, what environment or what things contribute to people performing well, right? I mean, what business doesn't want to know that? And so they set up this test, and it was really fascinating. So they took employees, and they took them to a hotel or something, put them in a room, and they gave them a challenge, like, let's say, something akin to an SAT test. And they had 2 different groups. And they created an artificial distraction in the room next door. So it was construction. Let's just say it was construction. And for you guys that remember this story a little more accurately than I do, I'm sure I'm taking tons of artistic liberties, but because I haven't read that book in 25 years, but this is the way I remember it. So, yeah. So they created this artificial distraction next door. It was like jackhammers, and it was really noisy and loud, and it was distracting, right? And with one group, the person sort of conducting the test basically just said, well, gee, guys, I have no idea what that is. It's a pain in the butt. I'm sorry, but hey, look, you're only going to be here in here for an hour, so let's just grind through it and move on, right? And then the other group, they handled it totally differently. They told them that, and they made something up, and like something along the lines that, this is a very important deadline we're trying to hit for the business, and so the guys are working, and they kind of explained why it was happening and why they were there, and basically communicated with them. But then they did give them an out, and they said, but look, these guys over there, they need to take lunch too, so they can. All you got to do is come over here, and maybe they took away the fear of like confrontation. Someone going, hey, be quiet in there, guys. So maybe they had something like, just put a do not disturb sign on the other side of the door, or flip a switch, or something like that. But at any rate, what happened is that the people in the second group performed far better on the test than the people in the first group. And the moral of the story, if you will, was that the difference was that the second group they were communicated to, which being communicated to is an expression of respect from the other, okay? And then they also gave them a way to affect their surroundings, essentially. So they gave them a way to remove the distraction. Oh, that's the other piece about the story. Nobody ever went over and removed the distraction. But simply them having been communicated to, and knowing that they had the ability to affect some change, did something inside them and made them more confident, more comfortable, and they performed better on the test. And so, anyway, I think you're picking up what I'm throwing down there. What is my guiding principle there? Communicating and showing signs of respect, and providing people in our companies with a voice, an ability to affect change in their work environment is critical. Application, make sure you always remember how important it is to empower. I do, in our mission statement, we use that word, and that's an example of how we try to empower staff. Empower them by communicating to them and give them a voice so they can affect change. Okay. There's another story there. What's my time? How am I doing?
You've got time.
Oh. I need communication.
15.
18 minutes.
18 minutes? Okay, we're good. There's one other story from I want to believe that it was from In Search of Excellence too. And it's a real quick story. And basically, there was this hotel that had I think it's the Michelin, which is that big international sort of rating agency or whatever. And I think the highest you can do is 4-star with the Michelin award. And anyway, this one hotel had won it like 5 years, more than any other hotel in the world. And I can imagine, not that I've stayed in any of them, but I can imagine if you're talking about the finest hotels in the world, it's a pretty big deal to win something like that 5 years in a row. And so they obviously wanted to make that, whatever. They wanted to investigate it. And so one of the things that stuck with me anyway, that was discovered about that hotel, was that every staff person in that hotel, from the manager of the hotel to the groundskeeper to the people cleaning the rooms, every one of them had a significant budget, like say $3,000, to be able to satisfy a guest, okay? And the moral of the story here, and another thing, just like the IBM one, it didn't get used very often, okay? You didn't have people squandering the business's money, but instead what you did is you had an environment where the management of the company extended great respect to every employee, regardless of their job, and empowered them to make a decision on the spot. I mean, the studies show in customer service, in my business, retail, if the customer has a complaint and you can resolve it on the spot, that like 90 whatever % of them will come back, okay? But where you fall apart is if it's not resolved on the spot. And so many businesses, business as usual, don't give that sort of power to every employee. Well, I got to go talk to my manager. I got to ask my manager, I don't know. And all that does is make the customer more upset. So anyway, I think that's another really amazing illustration. And we do things like that at Pilgrims. I mean, every employee at Pilgrims can return your product, can give you a gift card just out of the blue, can buy you a free lunch. I mean, whatever it takes. And I think that's another part of the puzzle in creating the culture of ownership that we shoot for. Okay, so now the last thing here really is the anyway, I kind of gave you all those things because I think they had a lasting impression on me, and they weave their way into everything I try to do there, and they fit really well with this sort of latest thing that I've done. About 3 years ago, I read that book I told you about earlier, The Great Game of Business. And I also read another book called Open Book Management by the Zingermans folks. Anyone ever heard of Zingermans? Yeah, okay. Anyway, they're this famous deli in Wisconsin, and they have like 13 other businesses. But anyway, they write books and they educate and teach on business management and stuff. But The Great Game of Business, there's a cool story. So the guy who wrote the book, his name is Jack Stack. He was maybe some executive. I don't know if he was an engineer or what, but he worked for this company in the early 80s, I think, called Springfield Remanufacturing. And they remanufactured diesel engines for, bulldozers and big equipment and maybe, trucks or something. But anyway, it was a really big, successful company at one point in time. And at the time that this story begins, it was no longer a successful company. And they were still doing like $15 million, so big in the way a lot of us would think, but they were losing money. And so the owners of the company came to Jack and a few other people and said, hey, we're going to shut this thing down, or do you want to buy it? And so he said, okay, we're going to buy it with a few other people. And one of the first things he did is he walked around the plant floor, if you will, the shop floor, and the big sort of aha moment that he remembers, because he was going to try to figure out every element of the business. We got to start at the basics and move our way up and figure out what we're doing wrong and how we can improve. And so when he was on the shop floor, there was a guy operating a drill press. And this guy's job was to drill perfect holes in probably big, giant chunks of steel for the engines. And that was his only job, right? And what was interesting is that the guy sort of guiding Jack around, giving him a tour of the floor, was that he said, that guy is a millionaire, independently, from his real estate investments outside of work. And, operating a drill press all day, maybe the guy was making 40 grand a year, he was making a good, decent money, but it wasn't becoming a millionaire. But anyway, that was sort of Jack's aha moment, because he's like, wait a minute, we have somebody with all this capacity for entrepreneurialism, problem solving, creativity, and all we're asking him to do is drill perfect holes? Really, right? So, and Jack was a big sports fan. And so somewhere in his, in that time and his thoughts, he realized that business as usual has some major shortfalls, because a lot of businesses have jobs just like that. And a lot of businesses have sort of untapped potential and creativity right there, but the business isn't doing anything to utilize it. And so he was into sports, and so he sort of came up with this analogy, and he was like, well, sports aren't that way. He's like, you don't have a football team and tell the linebacker and only tell the linebacker what the linebacker does. And I mean, the linebacker knows what the quarterback does, the wide receiver. I mean, he knows everything about it, okay? And so, anyway, this was his, big epiphany moment. And so he sort of said he wanted to bring everyone involved, okay? And he wanted to untap all of this potential. And so he came up with kind of 3 rules. I suppose he made 3 observations of what happens in sports. And then he said, we need to apply these to business. And the first rule was that everyone in the company, or on the team, if you will, needs to know and understand the rules. Well, in sports, we know that happens. In business, that meant that he was going to open up meetings so that every single employee had access to and was educated and taught the financials of the company. The full financials, like the books were open. And it was a kind of a do or die moment for that company because, look, I mean, he felt like, look, I can't run this thing from the top and like we've been doing and succeed. We need to get some sort of a grassroots effort and bring everyone involved. And so anyway, so everyone, the 3 rules are everyone in the business needs to know and understand the rules. And that means financial, certainly operational, but all the rules. Then number 2, the business has to keep score. So like in sports, I mean, if you're a linebacker, how do you compare yourself with another linebacker? How does a point guard compare themselves with another point guard? They've got all these statistics. They're keeping score in a million different ways. And a lot of businesses just keep score in sort of one way, like the profit and loss statement or the balance sheet. And in reality, if a business has a lot of different little teams, there's a million ways that you can keep score, communicate with your team so that your team knows how they're doing. And inevitably, most people, except for the people you don't want in your business anyway, most people want to do well. They want to perform. They want to succeed, especially if they're given the respect and ability to do so. Okay, and then the 3rd rule is share in the success. That's another element of sports that every sport has it, I mean, the quarterback, yes, maybe they get a lot of glory, but at the same time, everyone on the team gets that ring, I mean, if you win the Super Bowl, that is. So, everyone shares in the success. And so the sort of business application there that Jack talks about is profit sharing. You've got to open the books, you got to set all these goals, you got to keep score, and you got to share in the success. And basically, I'm in my 3rd year now of doing that, and I think it's working really great. I'll give you one little example. Oh, good, I'm going to finish early. I'm going to give you one little example. So, I have probably 15 departments where there's department managers that, like beer and wine and chill and produce and meat. And so they all have their own little fiefdom, and they get an order. But we have all these tools so that they're held accountable. They know how much they sold, how much they bought, what their margin, what their labor is, and they have goals and such. But anyway, margin specifically. So the first year I did this, on week 27, and I didn't really make this observation until week 27 of the 2nd year. But on week 27 of the 1st year, collectively, all of the departments had overspent by $80,000. Okay? And on the 2nd year, when, after anyway, it's a year later, and I decided I'm going to research this and see how we're doing. I mean, I knew I was seeing signs of success in other ways, but I hadn't really gone to this level of detail. Well, in year 2, week 27, I looked at how the stores were doing, departments were doing collectively, and they had underspent $80,000. So that's a $160,000 spread in that 1 year, just by giving and I'd been sharing numbers with the managers before. Oh, here's another critical part, is that in the great game business, you have huddles, right? So everything is a metaphor with sports, team meetings. But anyway, everyone reports their information in front of their peers. And that's pretty motivating. And because in sports, I mean, your peers know how you're doing. So anyway, clearly a $160,000 swing in 27 weeks, which is, I don't know, what is that? Yeah, 6 months or something. So that was really good. And that was a real sign of success. So I will say that, I don't know how many, there's a million things I could talk about the great game great game of business.
That's for a later comment.
Yeah, right.
Stay on task.
That's the evening. Okay.
We're limited in time.
Yeah, I know. So anyway, the basic 3 rules, make sure you teach and know the rules, keep score, and share in the success. And that's something we've been doing, and I think that it accomplishes a lot of things that it satisfies and accomplishes a lot of those sort of guiding principles that I feel that I've learned over my lifetime that I apply in the business, about really deeply respecting people, giving them freedoms and the ability to succeed, being patient with them, but at the same time providing very, very detailed framework within which they work, and then keeping score and sharing in the success. I mean, we the first year, I guess it was the same. I did the bonuses based on, and then the other piece is this. So basically, one element that I think is important. Jack tells people that want to do this great game business to take your minimum dollar that you need to profit in your company and hide that in your number somewhere, okay? And that's what you have to do. But any amount of money after that, basically split it with staff. Okay, you get to keep half of it. Staff gets half of it, and I've done that, and it's you still grow. And I could have given you details on what an amazing success story Springfield Manufacturing has been, and hopefully some of you will be inspired and get the book and look it up, and you can read for yourself. But this great game of business has been just enormously successful for Springfield Manufacturing. So at any rate, I think that this great game of business is a big piece of how I try to create that sort of culture of ownership at Pilgrims. I think that it works, not without failings, because we always fail. But I do think that it is working. And I had one last thing, and this is actually kind of interesting. I never thought of this before, but it came to me a couple nights ago when I was thinking about this presentation. And this is from the Declaration of Independence, actually. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are empowered by their Creator with certain unalienable, the word, rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's really cool, because we've created a government structure that's supposed to allow us the freedoms to be able to do those things. And I realized the other night, I'm like, it's not that different than what I'm trying to do in a business environment, trying to give the freedom for staff to pursue their passions and to be rewarded for it, and give them the liberty, which is kind of another word for empowerment and freedom of choice and all that, give them the liberty, with exceptions, to be able to do that. So anyway, that's it. No, my dad asked, I used the term to hide your profit in your numbers, and I did mean to say that. And what I do is we have a P&L. Basically, in my opinion, you need to share numbers with staff that they have an ability to affect. So I share, our advertising dollar, because maybe somebody has a great idea on advertising. I share our, utility expenses. They could, shut the cooler doors and shut off lights behind them, things like that. But there are certainly a whole lot of general expenses, and that's how I show it. When I show my P&L to staff, there are general expenses, and I have like 15 things in there. Rent's in there. There's nothing staff can do about rent, so why make the report longer than it needs to be? But I put the minimum amount of profit needed, to pay taxes and to reinvest in the business and to make capital improvements, because you always got to continue to do that. So I do put that, hide it, if you will, in the general expense number. And that is a detail that freaks a lot of people out when you start talking about open books. Like, whoa, wait a minute. People are going to revolt, what's going on. But I've never in 3 years had one person have a trouble, one person question, one person challenge me. They just appreciate being given, that sort of respect. Yeah.
When you unveiled that to your staff, probably a monumental moment, how was that received?
It was great because the way you do it is you, and they tell you how to do this in the book, but you need to have a pie chart, and you show a pie chart, and you first of all ask people, how much money do you think, I'm taking home, the owner of the business? How much does the business really make? And then you go through all the expenses. And what really happens is that it's enlightening because they realize that you make far less than they thought. And so you begin this sort of open book exposure with that, and people are kind of shocked, like, whoa, and I think they get it.
The reception was good.
Right,
Yeah.
it makes them feel a little more important because they think you're taking all the profits, where here, you're actually taking the minimal.
We're actually gonna have to cut this here, because he has a staff meeting,
Yeah, well,
so,
but we're okay for maybe, if we got 2 more questions or something, it's
Okay.
okay. I don't know if they're, yes.
You failed to make an analogy to a perfectly good recent example of what would have happened if United Airlines had the
Yeah,
power to remedy that situation rather than calling the Chicago airport police in to not all that gently escort that gentleman off the airplane.
yeah.
They are estimated to have lost over $250 million in stock values. I don't care to imagine how much publicity, if bad publicity they receive, people who, until this fades from memory, which could be decades, will never fly United again willingly as long as they live. I mean, what a perfect example.
That is, yeah. Because you have to believe if somebody felt empowered to somehow solve the situation, like maybe keep increasing the amount of money that they were going to entice people with to leave the plane. Okay, so,
Would've cost a lot less.
2,000 points wasn't enough. How about 10,000? I mean, yeah. Eventually somebody would have willingly got off the plane, right? Yeah.
They moved the Tapas to 10.
Yeah.
So there are some people that just want to come in, punch a clock, collect a paycheck. I assume that you're looking for somebody different that really wants to be invested in the business. What do you look for when you're hiring to make sure that you're getting?
Well, number one, I personally hire everyone. And so I look for certain characteristics, but I've I kind of know the kind of person we want. I mean, one thing that I think is very valuable thing, and I don't know who came up with it, but they have people, psychiatrists, and you can do all these personality exams on people, and but ultimately, I remember reading somewhere that this guy that hired thousands of people had said, at the end of the day, is this someone that you would feel comfortable with in your home on Thanksgiving dinner? And there's another story that might have been in Search of Excellence too. That was for Southwest Airlines, incidentally. And their symbol in the stock market is the heart and the love. And he's a great guy to read his books too about how he tries to bring just human touch and love into the business. But one of the ways they would, this was brilliant. One of the ways that they would figure out who their staff were going to be is they would have all their applicants come to a hotel room, and every applicant had to get up in front of everyone and give some sort of a speech. Like, that's an intense interview, right? They didn't give a rip about the speech. They were watching the audience to see who in the audience was like, good job, you did it. Who in the audience was comforting the other there. Because really you're like competing again. I got to make my speech better. But they were looking for the people that had that friendly touch. And so I look for that in the interview. And most of the time, you can teach people skills, but you can't always teach people just cordiality or whatever, to be nice.
I think, if you agree with me, we need this guy back.
No, yeah.
Let's give him.
Thank you.
Can I say one thing?
Sure,
That's his daughter.
right.
By the way, we have had We've had numerous Pilgrim's employees come over to our house on Thanksgiving dinner. You know, they have anywhere to go.
Joe,
wife
how long
here?
have you been in business?
That's my daughter.
Daughter?
Yeah.
Any other family?
He
Besides Dad?
started with
Yeah,
me
yeah,
in
yeah,
94.
yeah, yeah. Dad's wife, Michelle.
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
23
yeah.
years.
My mom forgot.
They won't
So-
know how long.
If you're out and about, you now have bragging rights. You can say that you have met and heard Joe Hamilton, and if they want to know more, they're going to have to come here because this is where he speaks.
Nels has exclusive rights.
I'd heard about Joe for a long time. The fact that he even granted me an interview, I was honored. And I think it had a lot to do with his daughter. I met her, I thought, man, they have attractive employees here. I didn't know who she was. She says, well, let me go get his card. And that's what started the whole thing. And then there was the intermail. That's a new term.
Yeah.
You can use that.
She takes after her grandfather.
Oh, gotcha. So we have a few announcements. We have a giveaway. And I'm very tempted to invite Joe back if he'll have us.